Hey everyone, I'm Zenith Priest, and welcome to one of my alternate strategies for Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds, where I'd like to explore an aggressive start with a turn 1 Towering Wrath. While its higher cost will delay our last growth option until about turn 4, the early damage often creates a nice tempo advantage, setting the tone for the rest of the game. Taking the third growth option for enough energy will open up 2 plays, and while the intuitive choice may be to grab the second growth option, instead, we're going to use the energy from the first option to play Boon of Growing Power. This delays the power gain until the slow phase, where we have more information on what we might need, while also letting us punish those who trespass and start spreading wilds. Let's jump right into a game and see how this plays out. We'll begin with a simpler setup on a board where we start in the center, giving us lots of reach. We'll also begin with the Jungle Explorer, giving us that added tempo. Jumping to the slow phase with a Mountain Explorer, we have the space to destroy the wetland town before gaining our power. This early in the game, I recommend looking at miners since we haven't yet established our energy base. While defense is always a good option for Keeper, we could also make use of fast control, specifically Dahan movement to clear out the jungles we can't reach, like Veil the Night's Hunt or Bird's Cry Warning, but also town movement such as Call to Isolation or Enticing Splendor to prevent the jungle from blighting. We could also use a fast fear effect, hoping the earned card will do what our power choices couldn't. Any of these will also have the added benefit of locking out the sands, preventing the invaders from sneaking into our backline. Unfortunately, we get none of these, sealing the jungle's fate. What we do get are some good options for keeping the upper island on lockdown. We can dismiss Rain of Blood since we don't need to augment our fear count, and it doesn't have our main elements. And we can also pass on Fleshrot Fever because even though it's very similar to the other two, it has a higher cost that the extra elements it grants doesn't quite justify. Savage Mobbeast might be a slightly better pick because even with its target restrictions, the range allows easier access to control the center. However, I personally prefer the Fireleaf that animated Rackroot provides, allowing for the second tier of punishment should the game persist long enough to be necessary. Now we can finish our turn, spreading wilds into the coastal mountain to solve that problem, while also setting up for a sacred site. After punishing the explorer for trespassing, we proceed. With Sacrosanct Wilderness, we could push the Dahan and clear the jungle, but we'd leave our mountain undefended next turn. Because we have more options with Dahan on that side of the board, I feel comfortable in letting the jungle blight without consequence for now, and instead reclaim for Towering Wrath to destroy the mountain town. This time, take presence from the top track, making our way to 4 energy, and pair up Regrow from Roots, though we could also play Boon of Growing Power again if we were under more pressure. Our slow phase is fairly typical, destroying the town to earn our first fear card, and clearing the blight while stopping the upper wetlands from building and punishing the explorer that dares trespass. Following our pattern, we reclaim again and complete a new sacred site with the top presence, pushing the Dahan to clear the mountain on the Ravage. Towering Wrath will destroy the city, and Animated Rackroot keeps our energy sufficient to grab our 4th growth option as a first choice next turn. Since Command Beast won't be usable after the Ravage, we can gain a fear from it now. Scapegoats kills the Jungle Explorer, and then we wait our turn. Another Jungle Explorer is unfortunate, but that was the risk we took earlier. We can still carry out our destruction of the city, and Animated Rackroot will tip us into Terror level 2. Spreading wilds into the wetlands and destroying the Trespasser, we enter turn 4 with only the jungle to worry about. Moving into the wetlands while opening up 5 energy, we commit to clearing it with Sacrosanct Wilderness. For our major power, we're looking for a way to clear the jungle, so we can rule out Talons of Lightning right away. Infinite Vitality does provide a safe route, as we should be able to push enough Dahan in before they ravage to clear it completely, but we're trying to be aggressive. Sea Monsters certainly fits, but so does Strangling Firevine, which is cheaper and has our elements. At this point, we can forget Boon of Growing Power, as we have gotten sufficient use out of it, especially if we've used it every turn so far. Since we're gearing up with a major power, we'll continue taking from the top track, keeping our energy up and grabbing another leaf to help with the Firevine's threshold. Sacrosanct Wilderness pushes the Dahan into the jungle, so even in the worst case where the jungle blights, the Dahan will still clear the remaining town. Dahan Enheartened will destroy the Explorer. Panicked by Wild Beast doesn't have an effect this game. After the invaders take their turn, we're still just left with the jungles to worry about. Before using Strangling Firevine, add an extra wild somewhere to be able to destroy the city. Even if we flip a blight card, we're still basically winning, but after reclaiming and drafting Lure of the Unknown, we can end the game with a healthy island. Now let's look at a less ideal situation. On that B board, we end up in a corner, and the sand start puts the initial wave out of our reach. As we construct our sacred site, push the Dahan into the mountain, keeping them safe from our towering wrath. In some ways, this opening works out just fine. Between Towering Wrath and Spreading Wilds, the upper board will be locked out from the next wave. Mountains it is, and we see what our power choices are. No defense, and the only fast control targets a land outside our reach, and wouldn't help with our current problem. We could use Like Calls to Like to stop one of the next explorers, but we'd have to gather them further into the upper lands, which isn't ideal, even though it does have our elements. Reaching Grasp can be useful to spread wilds and establish influence on the lower half of the board, but it's not a really exciting pick when we're faced with 2 Blight next turn if we don't find anything. While this or Like Calls to Like are okay picks for what they do, we're going to take the Fast Fear with Sucking Ooze and hope we can find a better power next turn, or have the Earn Fear card protect our sand. With that in place, we'll clear the upper board as planned before we continue. Last game, I showed you what can be done with a reclaim loop, cycling Towering Wrath to keep pummeling the invaders. This time, we've already cleared out the invaders in our proximity, so there's not a good target to channel our anger. And considering we missed with our power gain, this is a good opportunity to try again with another suite of powers. Initially, these seem really good, as we have 2 solid defense options. On closer inspection though, we find that neither of them will be useful this turn, since we'll need to be present for both. Reaching Grasp would have let us defend, but we don't have enough card plays to also push the Dahan in and clear it. Lure of the Unknown, however, is exactly what we're looking for, offering a fast effect to keep from blighting and providing a few of our elements. Expanding outward from the top track and pairing Lure with Sacrosanct Wilderness, we'll be able to keep the upper island on lockdown and earn our first Fear card. Unrest protects the other sands as well, leaving us with just the coastal mountain and the new explorer. With the jungle blighted, we're not able to push the explorer out, leaving us with a few options to add wilds, since Lure provided the air for greater range. The coastal wetlands would grant access to the coasts, which will need to take out the city, and help keep the inland locked down. We could also go with the coastal sands, which also grants access to the coast, but instead of guaranteeing a secure inland, we'd be gambling with our next power gain, hoping for a usable defense, so we can safely push the Dahan to clear the mountain. Even more risky would be to place it in the mountain itself, since there are still a few defense options that have 0 range, but I wouldn't recommend that unless we're in a position of desperately trying to maximize our odds. We also have the default option of the middle sands, which still allows us to control the coastal wetlands if necessary, and we could push the Dahan out via a sacred site instead of Sacrosanct Wilderness. Option 1 seems safe, if a little passive, and option 2 seems fairly risky, and one we're not being overly pressured to consider. I chose option 3, because honestly I forgot I had the extra range, otherwise I would have picked the wetlands. So now we get to figure out the jungle problem as we enter Stage 2 exploration. Regrowth routes will be needed to get into the jungles and gain access to the coasts. Sucking Ooze isn't really doing much for us, leaning us towards either gaining another power or reclaiming. Since we know we have the answers in our discard, let's reclaim. And while Lure would prevent a build, having wilds in 2 of the 4 potential explores means that we can continue our aggressive stance, finishing our Sacred Site and picking Towering Wrath after pushing the Dahan into the sands. As the invaders take their turn, note that we now have sufficient energy to pick our last growth option. Doubling up on the jungles keeps us from placing wilds as we planned, but other than that, our choices remain the same, destroying what we can while earning another fear card and removing the blight. With the jungle now accessible and possessing sufficient energy, let's set up that central Sacred Site. Start with the last growth option, seeing what our power options are before finalizing placements. We don't quite have enough energy to feel comfortable reaching for major power, though we do have fodder with Sucking Ooze, which makes that a viable option to start forming plans a couple turns out. I also feel like we don't really need a major power at this point, since Towering Wrath can take out the city for us, so I'll just go for a minor here. Absorb Corruption is pretty solid, as is Nature's Resurgence. The other 2 will be a pass. The Tormenting Rockflies does add extra options for securing the island. Either of the other 2 are fine, but I'm going to take Nature's Resilience in case the mountains explore before we can otherwise take care of it. We have the freedom of placing presents from either track, depending on our needs, and since we haven't really ventured into major powers, I'm inclined to go for more card plays, so let's take from the bottom track. Sacrosanct Wilderness clears the jungles, and since all we need is an answer to the mountains, we can also play Boon of Growing Power. Looking at what's left, we don't really have a need to play anything else, so we could go back and open up a 5th energy instead, hitting 3 plays next turn. Quarantine keeps everyone at bay, and once we're able to act, we can search for a major to finish the game, since we now have a sufficient energy base and can easily forget Sucking Ooze. Digger of the Breaking Dawn will be that power this game, and will claim victory on the fast phase with this and Sacrosanct Wilderness. So while this strategy took a little longer to gain traction this game due to a lack of coastal reach, we were still able to lock down the upper island fairly quickly and make our way down while still keeping everything under control. Its diversity of options is certainly making this strategy one of my favorites for Keeper, even if it may be slower to take advantage of the last growth. As the difficulty of the game increases, I do find myself looking for major powers as a default once the last growth option becomes available, typically forgetting Boon of Growing Power unless another one isn't working. The one adversary I'm currently having with this strategy is the Habsburg Monarchy, as I haven't quite figured out how to deal with their extra health and punishment for keeping the land blight-free. But otherwise, I've been able to hold my own. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you run this strategy, I'd like to hear what works for you and what doesn't. Alright everyone, that's all I've got this time. Hope you gained some insight, and good luck in your next games.